Hey, everybody, and welcome to DocTalk. We have a little change up today. Dr. Hannon, unfortunately, is sick, so we are joined by two amazing guests today. Rachael Sutton is one of our esteemed therapists here at Very, and Bryn Miller. Thank you, brilliant Bryn, for joining us. Bryn is a LPC and SEEDS supervisor and has an amazing coaching program. We put the link actually in the calendar event on the community. So today, I brought these two wonderful clinicians in for DocTalk so we can get into the nuts and bolts of FBT, family-based therapy. So tell us, what is this and why is this such a big deal in eating disorder care? Bryn, you go first.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the first kind of thing to name about family-based treatment is that it's not family therapy. And that's such a misnomer, which makes sense because it's kind of confusing, right? That you sort of think you're going to get broad spectrum family therapy. And that it's a really specific, really targeted approach for adolescents and young adults with eating disorders, where it's called family-based because we really put the parents in charge of the refeeding process. And the kind of philosophy behind that is that as the child, and I'm gonna use the term child to mean, a parent's child. We've done studies and seen efficacy with FBT through what we call transition age youth. We see this used really effectively in people that are in their mid to late 20s. So really, really effective across the, age span. But, back to the idea of we're putting the parents in charge because the person that's struggling with the eating disorder is really struggling to get what they need because of the nature of this illness. And so, it should almost be called like parent-based treatment.
Yes.
And so that idea of like, the family piece, although a big component of it is that, when possible, and, it's recommended that we do bring in the siblings, we do bring in the step parents, we do bring in grandma if she's around all the time, because we're really trying to bolster the support system around the person that's struggling and also get as many tools and as much support to the caregivers, the parents, the families that are impacted by this, because it's not just the person struggling. When we're in a family system,
Totally.
it has a huge impact on everyone. I mean, I've had parents describe it as like, this kind of feels like a bomb went off in my home, like in the middle of my house, right? And so, it turns everything upside down. And so we really want to be able to get support and skills to everybody that's being impacted, which is usually everyone in the family system.
Totally, totally. And it makes so much sense, as you said, because the person who's struggling can't be responsible. They really cannot fathom and have that sort of executive functioning to plan and organize themselves around eating and keeping up with everything they have to manage going through eating disorder care. I mean, let's be honest, like what teenager can even keep up with homework, the things that are age appropriate, like let alone now you're asking them to do something they don't want to do while they're malnourished. Goodness. No, no, no.
Totally. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces that makes this so tricky and that makes it so important to bring parents in, is because, for two reasons. We have someone that if they're underweight, we have a malnourished brain that we're dealing with, and you can speak better to me on better than I can on the impacts and the implications of that. But also, this is the nature of, especially anorexia nervosa. It's in the DSM, that someone doesn't understand the seriousness of the illness, that you get somebody with anxiety or depression and they're like, oh, I don't want to feel anxious, I don't want to feel depressed. But when we're in that restrictive phase of an eating disorder, it feels good, it feels like I'm doing the right thing, and so we go further and further down that rabbit hole. And so just another reason that it is so valuable and so effective to put the parents in charge.
Totally. So tell us a bit about how it's organized then. You went through kind of the purpose of it and, why that is necessary, but what is the structure of FBT?
Yeah, so we look at it in three phases. And so phase one is really kind of black and white. The parents are almost 100% in charge of what the child is eating in a given day. So they're deciding what's put in front of them. They're deciding how much they need to eat. And the main goal, like kind of sole focus of phase one, is really refeeding. We're really, really focused on weight restoration in phase one. Again, because we're working with this malnourished brain. And I'll kind of take a pause if that's okay, and
Yeah.
kick it to you, Dr. Knopf, and have you speak to why the malnourished brain is something that we so need to focus on before we get to anything else. And then I'll kind of get back to phase two and phase three.
Totally. So when the brain has been in a caloric deficit, the whole body is now in a famine mode. And that means growth is suppressed. That means endocrine systems are not working. Bone marrow is suppressed. So many biological processes are completely interfered with. And the only way the brain and the body come out of famine mode is to have a continuous period of time of a positive feedback loop that resources are plentiful, meaning there is adherence to a meal plan consistently and regularly until you're back at a more appropriate nutritional status or weight restoration status. And then the brain starts to heal from that point forward. So until you get there, you're treading water. You're potentially keeping someone alive, but they're not actually going to be through to a clearing where they can actually recover.
No, thank you. And and the because all of that is so detrimental, and can be so dangerous,
Yeah,
right? We really have to focus on getting that piece up and running before we can do any of that other kind of what we would call like more cognitive work, right?
totally.
The other thing, and you can again speak to this, is just the way that malnutrition and that caloric deficit leads to more obsessive thinking in the brain. This keeps us locked in this restrictive cycle that makes it even harder for the child to do something like get enough food or challenge those scary foods, have that slice of pizza that they used to love, or the
Yep.
cupcake, that they haven't had in so long. And so that's why phase one is just so,
Oh,
so important and laser focused on that weight restoration piece. And
and
then
parents don't really understand that obsessional part where their brain is sending out adrenaline and epinephrine as if they're face to face with a saber-toothed tiger, even though they're looking at a bowl of ice cream, for example.
and this can be such a challenging thing for parents because you just want to shake your kid and be like, it's just a hamburger, eat the hamburger, right? Or like, don't you understand? And you're like, to say that, it's so key of like, imagine, sometimes I'll say to parents, like, if you have a phobia, if you've ever been afraid of flying or you hate spiders or something, imagine that sitting down in front of a slice of pizza is that, right? It's the saber-toothed tiger, it's the, barrel of cockroaches, like whatever it is. Oh, right. And so to have so much empathy for your child of this isn't something they're choosing. This isn't a behavioral, like, oh, this is really that fear response that's coming up for them. And the way that when they're in that malnourished state, the obsessive thinking is just so amplified.
Totally. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're about to move on to phase two.
So phase two is sort of this like gray area where we pass the baton back to the child, because the whole goal of family-based treatment is to get us out of this crisis mode, to get the child weight restored, and then return them back to a place that's developmentally appropriate in terms of their own independence around eating. And I think this is maybe another confusion where kids will sometimes say like, oh, my parents want to be in charge of my food forever. And I'm like, no, 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 no parent I've ever met wants to be in phase one forever and ever. But we have to go slow, and we have to really kind of gradually give the child more and more responsibility until we get them back to where they would be prior to the onset of the eating disorder. Like, I'll ask families, if this had never happened, what would you expect your 12-year-old or your 14-year-old or your 17-year-old or your 27-year-old to be able to do? Are they making the family dinner? Are they packing their lunches? And so we're really just using that, and it's different for every family, as the goal of, we want to pass back all of those responsibilities as the child is demonstrating their capability to do it. So this doesn't mean they're not having eating disorder thoughts. This doesn't mean they're not struggling with body image distress, but they're showing that they can do it behaviorally. They can get themselves what they need. And so we are able to hand that back to them more and more. And then phase 3, I like to call this the phase where we're just fighting about normal teenage stuff.
Yeah.
That once a family comes in and they're like, well, we had this fight about curfew, or I don't want to do my homework. And I'm like, how's the food stuff? And they're like, oh, well, no, it's fine. I'm like, this is where you graduate, you know? And so I always say, like, FBT doesn't cure teenager. It works on the eating disorder. But when we get to that phase where we're fighting about friends and, you know, how long are you on your phone and all of that, it probably means we're in a good spot, and then you taper off, with the idea always of you can go back and get support. And so that's sort of that phase 3, and you wrap up there.
Amazing. So we have phases, but then we also talk about levels when we talk about FBT. And if anything, this is a really integral tool that often people don't really know how to use well and effectively. So, Rachel, can you tell us more about the level system and why this is helpful when doing the FBT program?
Yeah, and Bryn, feel free to jump in at any point too. A level system is a tool that helps sort of, I think of it as taking some of the emotion away, right? The conflict that shows up because it is placed on a sheet of paper that can be put on the refrigerator, and it sort of offers an expectations for the child to know where they are, what they need to be working on, how are they progressing, how do they reach their goals, which more often than not I find is like independence, right? They want to have all this independence back, which is whatever it may be within the home. And then it also offers a space for parents to kind of feel that empowerment that FBT is wanting, because they get to have the discretion and make the choices of what is best for their child within the home. What would you add anything, Bryn?
No, I think you explained that really well. And I think, like you said, that we're taking the emotion out of it. And I think you're also, the cool thing about a level system or a star chart or a sticker chart, incentive chart, whatever you want to call it, it allows the parents and the child to kind of all be on the same page of like, these are the rules of the game. You know, I would say, like, if you think you're playing basketball and your kid thinks you're playing lacrosse, like there's going to be a lot of confusion and conflict. Like, let's just all say we're playing basketball and here's the rules, and this gets you 3 points and this gets you, I don't know anything about basketball, but like, you know, we get the idea. And so it also like puts parents in the situation where they're not having to come up with things on the fly of like, well, okay, well, you didn't finish your lunch, like, now what do I do, right? It's like we have a plan that we all wrote down, we all agreed upon when we were calm, and then we can rely on that system. So you're not feeling like you're having to just sort of, you know, improv in the moment when your distress levels are high.
So share a little bit more then on what you build into the level system. You kind of alluded a little bit of, oh, now you're missing a meal or missing a snack. Now what do we do? So obviously meal structuring or meal adherence is part of the level system. What else do you guys usually include in there?
Go ahead,
Um,
Rachel.
yeah, so I think it can be discussion around body image. It can be things that they're working towards. So technology use, increased use in social media. So it's something that they get to visualize, that they're reminding themselves, oh, right, if I complete my meal plan, if I start my meal right when I sit down, if I am following these things that, again, we talked about when we were calm, then I know what I'm going to be working towards and earning. And then it's also helpful to put in, I guess, the like natural consequence of restriction or even self-harming driven behaviors, right? Those other maladaptive behaviors that oftentimes when you hyper focus on an eating disorder and you see other stuff showing up, the panic sets in of, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Because their behavior is changing. And so it also offers that place of like, great, we can bring that into this level system and offer that support in a similar way that they're used to. And then it's very straightforward. The child knows what to expect of like, okay, I restricted today. So that means that I will just need more support and I'll move down a level for at least 24 hours and discuss like with parents how I do after that. And it's, phrasing it of like, when behaviors show up, they're asking for support, even if they're saying, I don't want it. And so thinking of it more of a support than, oh, my kid did this thing and now they're,
Right.
oh, spiraling again. It's like, well, and here's this plan to help.
I love how you made that distinction, because so many kiddos and even parents will feel like it becomes just an incentive or punishment chart versus simply recognizing that when behaviors are loudest, that means the emotional burden is the strongest. And that's when they need as much support and bolstering as possible. You don't want to have less pillows, you want more pillows. So, it really is helpful to, take that power struggle out of it, take out that narrative that gets transferred to this tool from the typical parent-child interactions. I love it. Okay, but here's my big thing, because I have a lot of patients and families that I'm working with, and they say, but it's not working, it's not working. And I always realize that there's something they misunderstood or they're not implementing. And so I want to just kind of ask, what have y'all experienced in your careers to this point around what are myths people come in with or believe about FBT, and what are musts that people need to make sure they are including in their engagement with FBT? Nose goes.
Bryn, go first.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I think there's so many myths around FBT. I think, gosh, I don't even know where to start. I think that question of like, is it working is so important, and working with your team, and you guys are rock stars at this, obviously, of what are the markers that we're making progress. And I think it's really important to say your child saying like, gee, thanks, mom. I'm so glad you're sitting with me for all my meals and making sure I'm getting weight restored is an unlikely response. The eating disorder is gonna push back and fight. It's like an animal that we backed into a corner. It's going to come out swinging. And so the more we push on it, the more distress that you're going to see from your child. That doesn't mean it's not working. In fact, it often means it is working, because we're like, it means we're pushing on the eating disorder, which is really, really important for your child and their recovery and their treatment. But gosh, as a parent, it's so counterintuitive, and it feels like my kid hates me, I'm doing this wrong, everything's getting worse, let's just walk away. And so I think really using your team, and in those moments when you're not in the throes of it, to say, okay, what are the markers that things are getting better? What does that mean in terms of a weight? What does that mean in terms of caloric intake each day? What does that mean in terms of my child's mood and their presentation? And, there's this amazing thing that happens through the treatment, and especially the weight restoration, that parents are like, oh my God, my kid's back, right? Like, how many times have we heard that, right? It's like, they'll come in and they're like, it's like something comes in and takes over my child, and they get this different face, and it's like, I don't even recognize them. And this is really the eating disorder kind of obfuscating the child. And then as we're doing this work, we're like pulling this apart, where we can see the illness and as separate from the child, and really externalizing this. That's not my kid that's lying and throwing food at me and hiding food and all of those things, right? Like, this is not your child. This is your child's illness, and it's separate from them. And then when we really see it happen with the child, and then this is when parents are like, my kid's back, or like, I see the light behind their eyes again, or like they're laughing their old laugh. It's just, I mean, it's why we do this work, right?
That is why we're here, people, because we believe in recovery for everybody.
Yes.
Trust us, it works.
Totally. We want to like bring your kid back to you, right? And
totally.
I mean, it gives me goosebumps. And so, yeah, and that being said, I had a mom so beautifully say, I found love in some of the darkest corners as she was doing this. And it really, I know, isn't that gorgeous? Of love doesn't always look like, hey, thanks for doing this, mom. It's these moments of really holding these limits and being with your child when they're incredibly distressed, and showing up again and again and again and again to get better.
I actually, even with my own kids now, trying to really prove unconditional love. I always say, like, I love you more than the behavior you have right now. I love you more than how you're yelling at me. And I actually think that that is a really useful phrase for all families going through this of, I know you're struggling. I want you to know I love you more than how much you're fighting me on this. And I will always love you more than that. And it just, that reaffirmation of, I got you, is so important,
Yes.
Rachel, what other myths must do you think of?
Yeah, I mean, something that kind of I always think of that comes up is when we talk about like the phases of FBT or even within the level system, the frustration that follows of like thinking that you just follow it and that's what happens, and there is no like fluctuation within it, because then it's like, oh, I failed my kid, or oh, I failed. And the reality of like eating disorders are not a linear thing in general. Nothing about it is. And so everyone's recovery is different.
Yeah.
And so I think that was always something to like make sure that was like okay and accepting of like it's going to feel really messy at times. And sometimes you walk away feeling like you failed and that you didn't do it right or you made it worse. And again, it doesn't mean it's not working.
Right.
Uh,
Oh, I
and I
love
feel like
that.
more often than not, when we walk away feeling like we made it worse, it's because it is working, because we're
Exactly.
upsetting the eating disorder, just like Bryn had said.
Exactly. I think one of the musts I talk to families about is actually getting their own therapists during this time too.
Mhm.
Because FBT might seem like, again, as you pointed out very clearly, therapy versus treatment, it might seem like it's going to be a therapy for you and the family, but it actually isn't. It's really there to help create structure and guidance and expectations and shared language, vocabulary around what does this look like as we try to eradicate the eating disorder from our loved one. But parents, I hope you're hearing like there's a lot of emotional burden you're going to be holding. And guess what? You're also human with your own feelings, with your own lived experiences, with your own baggage, triggers, whatever you want to call it. And guess what? The eating disorder is so sinister, it's going to push every single vulnerable button you've got.
Absolutely.
So, a must is make sure you're taking care of yourself through self-care, being engaged with community, friendships, leaning into people, knowing you're not a burden when you need more support yourself, and
Mhm.
really making sure you have your own therapist so you can bring that emotional reaction to a space for processing. Because if you don't, it's going to bite you in the booty, is my perspective.
Yeah, I think
Try to
that's
leave it
so,
at
oh no, I think it's so important, Erin. And you know, we ask parents to go in and do battle day after day after day, and we want them to be calm and we ask them to be
that.
non-critical of their child and
So
also
easy, so
it's
easy.
so easy, right? And also like feed them 6 times a day and like make sure you're watching them for lunch, even if they're at school. I mean, this is truly, I think, one of the most incredible asks that we put to parents. We do it because it's been shown to be really effective. But that doesn't mean it's not, I say it's the emotional equivalent of like throwing yourself in front of traffic for your child. Like we would all do it for our kids in a heartbeat. And it doesn't mean that we don't get banged and bruised in the process, right? And so take care of yourself, get your support, get your skills. You cannot expect yourself to do this day in and day out if you are not taking care of yourself. I mean, it's just too heavy a lift, it's too big an ask. And I think the really cool thing about that is that you're also communicating to your child, you're modeling for them that it's okay to get help. It's okay. I mean, you just said like that you're not a burden if you need some more. Like, how many times have we heard from kids like, I'm such a burden to my family because of my eating disorder? Like, what a great way to show them that that's not how you feel by getting your own help, getting your own support. It's the coolest thing when I work with parents and caregivers and they'll tell their adolescents like, yeah, I'm going into my therapist today. And they're like, oh, really? Like, well, oh, God, that's cool, right? Like, there's such this moment of like, oh, it's not just me, you know, like we're in this together. And so it really is, it's for you first and foremost, but it really is such a cool thing to model for your child that you're getting help and support, just like you're asking them
Yeah.
to take your help and support. So
And to clarify, you're not going because of them.
yeah,
You're going for them because you want to show up for them
yes,
strong and whole and complete. And this is what it takes to fill your tank.
totally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel, anything to add on that?
I mean, I think the only thing that I think about often, and I will express it to families, is when you see the distress in your kid and it is being taken out on you, and you're feeling like you're just a constant punching bag. And at some point, it's like, is this even an eating disorder that's really coming at me, or is my kid just resenting me?
Mm.
And I think oftentimes I always share like that's happening because you are their safe space, you are their safe person, and like reminding yourself that you're showing up for them every day and that's helping them feel safe, even if their behaviors don't reflect that.
Mm.
Totally. I think it's hard because we all understand, especially those of us who've had kids or currently have toddlers, we can excuse these bad behaviors and meanness from kids when they're little because it's like, oh, they don't know any better. But it's really hard when a 17-year-old is in front of you who can articulate in a very decisive, pointed way, again, just devastating you and literally ripping your
Twist
ego
the
to
knife.
shreds. Yeah, it is just awful. But I think that is exactly what you said, one of those moments where parents can remind themselves, okay, my kids only show up in their worst way to me for a reason.
Yeah.
Again, my kids are wonderful with everyone else, but Lord have
Mhm.
mercy, even my husband notices that they whine more if I'm in the room. If I'm out in the room, it's different. Um, but I think it's important for parents to remember that hasn't changed just because you have an older kid. Their brains are still developing. It's not fully cooked until 25, and there's a good reason to imagine it's being held back and suppressed in its development if they're enduring a severe enough eating disorder. And actually, I take back the enough. Any eating disorder is severe, period. Let it be written, let it be known. And it's just a lot easier to say, okay, I'm going to picture my child as their inner child, the 4-year-old inside of them right now that is just trying to survive and love that part and use the level system so you can depersonalize how their
Yeah,
behaviors show up.
Mhm.
Uh,
totally.
any other thoughts, any other words of wisdom or resources that you like to point people to when they are going on this journey? I know parents get really overwhelmed with all the information we share with them as providers, especially if they're meeting with a full team. So what's like a guiding light, guiding post you like to lean on?
Can I grab something from my bookshelf?
Please grab away, and we'll
Um,
make sure we put a link to it in the event too.
This book, I love so much, When Your Teen Has an Eating Disorder, and it's written by Dr. Lauren Mulheim, who's an FBT expert. But my favorite thing about it is this. It is because, I mean, I've got great books that are 4x this, but first of all, what parent has time? But especially a parent that has a child that's struggling with an eating disorder and they're trying to do FBT, they have even less time. And so this book, in the quickest way possible, just such great, incredible resources. So that's always my number one for parents. And then feast.com has incredible resources as well for parents and caregivers. They just came out with a caregiver toolkit, actually, talks through different skills. There's a ton of webinars and chats that you can talk with other parents that are going through this. I think they have a Facebook group that's just for parents and families. So that's another really fantastic. Those are my kind of two first go-tos for parents that are doing this.
Cool. Anything you want to add, Rachel?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's more, I guess, EFFT, but it is
Mm.
falls in line with the FBT. I like the Mental Health Foundation .ca, and it has like a whole list of books and videos and YouTube videos and handouts and all sorts of stuff. And that's one that I use in sessions with families often as well.
Yeah. And just for clarification, EFFT is emotion focused family therapy, which we will get into in another webinar. And maybe Bryn Rachel, should we do that together next time?
I would love that.
And it won't
Love
be
that.
the immediate next.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining DocTalk today. I am always so inspired by the work you both do and the passion and compassion you bring to your work. But this has been DocTalk. Join Dr. Hannon and I next week. We'll see you then.